The Daniel Craig James Bond era is over, and I have a lot of mixed feelings about it. He's my least favorite of the Bonds. I'm a giant James Bond fan, and I kind of feel like they ruined the character. Kind of, sort of. It does feel like they mostly ruined James Bond. The character, I think, shifted from the Brosnan era to the Craig era. While Craig's Bond has a lot of good things going for him playing the character and a lot of great ideas in his Bond era, those 5 movies. However, my problem with the Craig era films, they just made James Bond too depressing. He's supposed to be like Superman, where no matter what happens to him, he can always get up. He has tremendous amount of courage. Now, even though he's supposed to be like Superman, the James Bond films are still, for the most part, based on reality. So, as a man, to watch James Bond, especially watching the old Bond films, it was inspiring to men, because the message was, don't let the drama of the world take you down a peg. Get up, keep going, and that was the message of the character. That was what Bond did for men, for the self-esteem of men in the world. And it was more than he was just cool. It was inspirational, and it was exciting. It made you feel special, and it made you feel like you could do a lot of things and not allow the dramas of life to destroy you. But I feel like Craig's era of Bond made James Bond a little too vulnerable. He is no longer this Superman character. They wanted to make Bond more down to earth, which is cool, but in doing so, there's a limit, because when you go past that limit, then it doesn't feel like the same character anymore. And it's just not as cool. I like that they explored different ideas and concepts for the James Bond series during the Craig era, because it was interesting. And they were really experimenting, doing things they did with Bond that they never would dare to do before. But there's a fine line in the sand when it comes to writing the character of James Bond. Most of the best stuff with Craig as Bond comes from Casino Royale and I'd say Skyfall. But the other films, while they are good, there's just something about them that feels off-kilter. And doesn't it kind of feel like in most of Craig's Bond era, he's like, oh, I hate being James Bond. Oh, this sucks. Oh, I'm depressed. Why is this happening to me? Oh, woe is me. Oh, I don't know what I'm doing anymore. Oh, I feel lost. Oh, what am I even doing with my life anymore? What is even the point of this? Da 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 da. It feels like they wanted to explore Bond's personality, but in the end it doesn't amount to anything. Because, to me, I don't feel like Craig's character as Bond, his interpretation as Bond, I don't feel like it made the character grow. Just feels like he kept getting beaten up. And then, spoilers, in the last Craig film, he dies. It seems like through time, whenever they made the new Bond films during the 2010s, they were trying to accommodate the woke crowd, the feminist crowd, the PC crowd. It just seemed like they were trying to accommodate Bond so that there wouldn't be all these people complaining about how the character is like the biggest misogynist character in all of fiction. It is similar to the past, however. In the past, before the 2000s, they always tried to adapt Bond to the new eras of the world and bring Bond into each decade as not a slightly different character, but put Bond into different eras and see how he interacts with the changes of the times, which is interesting. But despite all of the changes in the world, the character of Bond still remained the same, for the most part. Yes, if you look at some of the 90s or 80s Bond movies, Bond is not as much of a ladies' man, per se, as he was maybe in the 60s era, but at the same time, he still was a ladies' man. That was still always an archetype of his character, which isn't just something that men found to be cool, but it was also something that was inspirational to men in how men interact with women. Bond's character, to me, traditionally, doesn't really quite seem like a misogynist, but more of a guy that knows what women find attractive in a man, and he's a master at it. And anytime he was very rough with women in the old movies, it was always out of a moment of stress, where he would do something wrong. something that he wouldn't normally do under normal circumstances. But I feel like nowadays these moments are laser focused in and overly interpreted to make Bond seem to be like this evil, toxic, male, misogynist dinosaur of a character. Throughout all the old movies, there were lots and lots of moments where Bond really did care for the women that he got to know throughout his adventures. And there were scenes and moments where he was very upset when they died. But the only reason why he doesn't stay upset for too long is because he can't. There's a mission. This is his life that he chooses to live. He's a complicated character, and I think that's why audiences found him interesting and entertaining. Other characters in fiction, people praise that they're complex characters, like Spawn from the comics or Batman. But for some reason, it's different with James Bond. He's not allowed to be complex. He's not allowed to do things in moments where he's stressed that he shouldn't have done. Looking at the older Bond films, they feel like exciting, colorful adventures where anything can happen. It didn't get too serious. Usually, there may be a scene or two or three where there are very serious moments, but it doesn't stop the pace of the adventure, and it doesn't feel like a different movie series. It feels like it's its own unique thing. The old Bond films seem like they're excited to have James Bond be James Bond, whereas the Craig-era films make it seem like it's extremely depressing to go on another James Bond adventure. The films are almost complimenting all those people that aren't James Bond fans, that never liked James Bond. It seemed like the Craig-era films were trying to cater to the other action films that became popular, where it's extremely serious and it's extremely dramatic, and characters go through so much character development. Character development is great, and Bond did have some of these moments in the old films, but when you focus way too much on the character development, then you're taking away what makes a fun James Bond film. The new Craig-era Bond films give off the vibe that says to the viewer, oh, you're a James Bond fan, but just a little reminder, you're outdated. That's what they kind of feel like. But what's silly and very strange about this is that the people that own James Bond fail to understand is that anyone who is a James Bond fan is an old school fan. Most of the James Bond films, they're all from the 60s to the 90s. So all those decades of a fan base, those are the people that are interested in the new James Bond movies with Daniel Craig. So I don't really understand this whole tactic of alienating 90% of your audience that you carefully built up and were proud of and cared about, that group of people, that sea of people that are James Bond fans. In this day and age, with the changing climate of political culture and wokeism and PCism and all that stuff, if anything, this is the era more than any other era where the people that own James Bond should be extra proud of the character of James Bond. That the Bond series is not going to change. It's not going to be like all these other series that have adapted and so altered their original property to fit in with the era. Because it's just strange in the lexicon of the character. The character of Bond isn't supposed to change. I feel like that's at the core of the character. The character is stubborn. That's what makes Bond Bond. So it feels strange that Bond would adapt to any different time period.